coming out as trans to my second graders. I am trans.
Silence.
Do you know what that means?
No.
It means I was born a different gender than I feel inside.
So you're a girl.
No.
Can you...
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Punching Left. My name is AJ Wilms, joined here with Mike Lauber, and wow, what a disgusting video at the beginning there. What's up with all the transgender elementary school teachers? Where do they all come from?
I don't know. We didn't have any when I was in grade school, at least not that I know of.
Yeah, same here. And I mean, like, you know, I was in grade school like 10 years ago or whatever, and not seeing any of these drag queens back then. I have younger siblings in grade school, elementary school. I don't know where these people are coming from, but it's kind of strange. You think if you're born this way and you can't help but express yourself, it would have been pretty consistent throughout history. But all of a sudden, in the last like 3 years, it seems, it's just boom, an explosion of all these trans people.
Yeah, it's almost like something changed, and now they just can't help it. They're out everywhere. Like there's something encouraging this behavior.
Oh, yeah, you would think so, right? Like there may be some environmental factors or some external forces maybe pushing them to do this, incentivizing them to do this. And it's kind of interesting, too, that we do see in America and the rest of the West an assault on children that is unparalleled in any other country. We see this with abortion. We see this with education. We see this with media. You know, I don't know. We might have the Star Wars story in here, but you know, a while back there was a Star Wars scene where they had like a lesbian kissing scene or lesbian scene. It's like, why are you guys taking like superhero movies and like kids movies and like Disney stuff and cramming in LGBT trash there?
Yeah, you know, it keeps happening. There was a story we covered a few weeks ago where it was a Marvel film where they won't show it in China because of a 12-minute I think it was a lesbian kiss scene or whatever, 12-second lesbian kiss scene. And that 12-second scene.
12 minutes. Whoa, holy, that would be even hardcore for us
here. 12 seconds, not 12 minutes. I mean, Disney's bad, but they're not quite that. Well, I guess they are that bad now. Yeah,
well, in one more year, we are going to have like some adult videos made by Disney, I'm sure, unfortunately, being pushed to the public. And yeah, I'm not sure if it was the Middle East or China, but in either case, both of these regions of the world do practice some degree of like, I wouldn't even call it like censorship. Obviously, China does have censorship, but like purity insurance or whatever, like preventing obscurity or whatever, obscenity.
Yeah, it's really more preventing obscenity than it is anything else. But it violates their cultural norms, so they don't want to see that garbage there. But Disney does have, and unfortunately we don't have a slide for this, but yeah, they are for Pride Month, which starts in, you know, what's the countdown now? We're at under 6 hours. It's Pride Month starts.
Yeah, man, that's going to be terrible. And you know what I love, speaking of the Middle East, is like all these companies, they always have like their LGBT logos, their rainbow logos. But if you ever look on their Twitter accounts for like their Chinese division or their Middle Eastern division, or even a lot of their like African ones, if they have any, never, ever have like the LGBT stuff because the people there won't stand for it. It's only in Western nations, Germany, France, England, America, Sweden, that we actually put up with this BS.
Exactly. I just saw like the tweet circling out now with BMW Dubai, where they won't change their profile, but they will, and all the rest of them.
Of course, that's capitalism, baby, and that's almost like one of the things that annoys me about libertarians is it's like, look, I get your guys' arguments because, like, in theory, they work. You can point to, like, Dubai and be like, oh, look, the free market works in Dubai and it keeps out the LGBT stuff. But see, the thing is that in America, where I live, it's not working. And I just want a safe country for my people. And if I can't get that through just free market enterprise, I'm going to look through other avenues of approach. And right now, the free market, whether it's with Disney or Microsoft or any big corporation in America, literally any mega Fortune 500 company, you're going to get a lot of this progressive policy stuff.
Yeah, like that Stone Toss meme, like that everybody's seen, I'm sure, with like the marketing people and the guy, like, how will this help us sell more hamburgers? Yeah, I mean, there's so much truth in that, and I think that's why like so much of what Stone Toss does is so impactful because they can just encapsulate it in 1 to 4 frames and illustrate the point perfectly. Yeah, Disney, they've got a whole lineup now of some LGBTQ drag queen hosted show that's coming out for Pride Month on Disney Plus. So if you haven't canceled your subscription, now's your chance.
Exactly, and we see this with Netflix as well. It's not just with Disney, but with Netflix putting out like shows like Cuties, everyone's heard of. But there's a lot of other shows that are just completely degenerate and gross. I mean, from things more like minor, I guess you could say, like Glee, where it's like, oh, look at all these gay like high school kids, and oh, look at the gay couple here and the lesbian couple here, and blah blah blah, and like the strong independent woman who's never going to get married, and the girl who wants to get an abortion. That's like one thing. But they also have films that are just explicitly and like very forwardly anti-Christian. Like there was, I think, a Brazilian Netflix show where they presented Jesus as like a gay man or something like that. I mean, it's just obscene that they're pushing things like this.
Well, yeah, and at least Netflix seems to have kind of gotten the message. They ditched their anti-racist baby cartoon finally over the backlash, and then canceled some other Rex Kendi project that he had lined up, and they've backed down from some of their other shows and told their staff, we're no longer going to cater just to these woke things. I mean, I'm not about to go like renew my next Netflix subscription yet, but at least they learned their lesson, and it only cost them, what was it, $230 million?
Jeez. Yeah, I remember covering that story on here, and it was a lot of money that they lost. And what's the anti-racist baby thing? I never heard of that. Is that like Boss Baby, but like anti-racist baby?
Well, it's that book. So it's a children's book.
I've seen that.
And they were going to make a cartoon series out of it for children, but they canceled it over the backlash. I guess that specifically, a lot of parents, there was a letter writing campaign that a lot of these parents that are involved in the CRT thing pushing that off the different school boards, taking over these school boards.
Let's go.
Yeah. So, I mean, this stuff is effective. Awesome. And that's something, again, that our side needs to be capitalizing on right now. Like, I don't understand why more elected Republicans aren't reaching out to these school boards, showing up at the meetings themselves, and getting behind these parents. Because if you want to cultivate a big base, you have to do the same thing the left does. So when there's these protest movements going on like this, we need to get behind them. A lot of these people are waking up right now. Like, this is what finally got them charged enough to do something. Mm-hmm. So the door is open. We just need to push them through the rest of the way so they don't go back to sleep when the next issue comes up that doesn't directly affect them.
Absolutely. And a lot of right-wing people, if they get mad at like women in politics and they say, oh, women vote too left-wing and all this stuff. And at the end of the day, not only is that like not exactly true, I think like white women in particular vote like much more right-wing than I think even a lot of other demographics do. But I bet any money, it was a lot of moms who were writing these letters that got this show canceled. And this was a massive indoctrination program essentially from, who was it, Netflix?
Yeah.
They wanted to do this, and it was like the moms of America who got together. I'm sure there's not a lot of dads who are like browsing the children's book section of the library. That's usually a son mother thing or a mother daughter kind of thing to do. So I bet it was the moms who really came through, as well as some great dads as well. So good job, moms of America, for making that happen or not happen, I guess. Yeah. And speaking of children just being, tormented, abused, and unfortunately even killed in America, I think Mike has some updates here for us on the shooting in Texas at the elementary school.
Yeah, there's been a lot of updates with that. And the thing that keeps what keeps bothering me about this is just how inconsistent it is and how the story just keeps changing. Mm-hmm. So I have a timeline up here on the screen that doesn't quite agree with the one that I wrote myself. But there's so much conflicting information, and unfortunately, like the Texas Department of Safety, the school themselves, and the Sheriff's Department, like they're not really putting out the best information. So what I'm going to read off is going to conflict with what I have on the screen a little bit, and some of the stuff I would say is plus or minus 2 minutes, because even different news agencies are reporting slightly different things.
And this is always developing too. Like every single day, there's new information that conflicts with yesterday's news. So if you're listening to this in the future and you're like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. There may be information that just changed because we're trying to go off of everything we hear from the news. The government is not releasing as of now any information other than like the shooter's name and a couple other details during press releases that people like Beto crash and disturb anyways. So that's just kind of a forewarning, but Mike has been doing a lot of research into this, so I think this will be pretty accurate here.
Yeah, and again, I think this is pretty close to reality, but also what's not helping it is, like we know, and we're going to cover the story in detail in a second, but there was one of the local law enforcement, one of the local police, straight up lied to the media initially when this happened, said that the police were met with gunfire, and I guess that never happened when they showed up on scene. But anyway, between 11 and 11:15, that's when the shooter shot his grandmother and then posted the message to social media. At 11:28, that's when he crashed a truck at the school, shot at 2 people at a funeral home across the street, and then began shooting at the building. At 11:30, that's when the first call goes into 911 from the school. 11:40, the school enters lockdown. or no, sorry, 11:40 is when he entered the school. 11:43 or 11:42, again, depending on what source you have, is when the school posted to their Facebook account that they were entering a lockdown due to an active shooter in the area. And at 11:44 is when the local police department arrived. So he was not outside, it doesn't sound like, still when the first cops showed up. Initially, that was the story that was reported, and it was also reported they may or may not have engaged there. But apparently he was already in the building by the time they showed up. 11:54, first parents arrive at school. Police hold them back. And then you have to go all the way to 12:45 is when the Border Patrol tactical officer who was getting a haircut is when he shows up armed. The local police try to prevent him from going in the building, said that's not what their orders say. He says, yeah, that's not happening. My wife and my daughter are in there. Takes his shotgun that he borrowed from the barber, it was cutting his hair, and then goes to the building and eliminates the suspect at either 12:50 or 12:51.
Wow. So he was the one who shot the guy, the barber guy, off-duty Border Patrol, you said? He goes to the school, and he was the one who took out the shooter.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, his wife sent him a text message while he was getting his hair cut, said there's an active shooter at our school, get here immediately. So that's what he does. That's what he does. He didn't have a service weapon with him.
Yeah, and people want us to give our guns up. And you listen to this story, and it's like all of the police, all the tactical units, even the Border Patrol, right? And I know there's some funny business there with them not being allowed to go in, but all of the government officials didn't do anything. It took an off-duty cop, right, who was getting his hair cut, and the barber, just some random citizen, right? He's like, oh, I have a shotgun in the back here. Here you go, right? Takes the gun. He goes to the school, takes out the bad guy. It took one, basically citizen. This was an off-duty police officer, not at work, taking a private citizen's gun and then taking out the threat. That never would have happened if we didn't have gun ownership in Texas, obviously. If we had to solely rely on government officials, the guy probably would still be in the school right now shooting up people.
Exactly. And as sad as that is, and this is the thing, like at 11:54, that's when the parents showed up, and that's when some of the armed parents showed up. And one other thing, in defense of the rest of the Border Patrol tactical unit that responded, I didn't get an exact lockdown time because, again, there's like 3 conflicting things that I found, but it sounds like they were only there 3 to 5 minutes before the guy that went in. So it's not like they were stalling too. I'm sure they were probably also pushing, we need to make entry. And this guy just made an executive decision and decided just to walk past them and go in.
Right. Well, the police were outside for, what was it, 50 minutes or up to an hour? That's insane. So no one up until that point had made that executive decision. And I think we talked about last show, or maybe we talked about privately, the fact that, within the military or police, obviously it's like you don't want to break rank. You want to listen to what your leader says, and you lean on your leadership because they're the ones who are supposed to have all the info and all the experience, and they're the leaders, right? So if the leader says, hey, don't go in yet, you're expected not to. But there's some cases when it's like you have to break rank, and sometimes it's awkward being that guy because if you go in, everyone has to follow you in, and if that was the wrong move and you get everyone killed or whatever, that's all on you. But at the end of the day, when there is a school shooting, and Mike brought up this point, it was really smart. He's like, look, there's a classroom, an entire school, in fact, full of kids, and are you going to let like an entire school of kids die so that 1 or 2 officers don't get taken out? Like, this is what you sign up for. This is what you're here for. They're all wearing vests. They're all armed to the teeth. They're ready to go. They should have morally, ethically, and I think even legally, like we're obligated to go into this building. And yeah, maybe there would have been a casualty on the side of the police. Luckily, there wasn't any, but that's the risk that you need to take because it's either 1 or 2 cops maybe getting shot. At least they have vests. They have a lot of weapons. They're a team versus an entire school. No one who's armed. No one can defend themselves. Most of them children being slaughtered.
Yeah, and this is the thing, like. There's probably not too many squad cars in the entire country now that don't have secondary weapons, a rifle or a shotgun, and hard body armor in the trunk of the vehicle. It's not like they wear it out every day all the time. They're not wearing hard armor. It's typically soft vest, level 3A Kevlar that'll stop handgun rounds. But there's not too many jurisdictions that don't have equipment for something like this in every cruiser. So like they're prepared for it. There's no excuse. So if you're the first officer that shows up on scene and maybe you're waiting 2 to 3 minutes for backup, maybe. But even then, like, these guys should have gone in. I mean, a lot of them went into the building and rescued their own kids. That's the other thing.
Whoa, really?
Yes. Yeah. So some of them.
So some of the police officers, they went into the school. They found their kid. They took their kid and ran out, and then they just stayed outside of the building.
Yeah, apparently. But again, all this stuff is now the feds are getting involved in the investigation now. So some of this stuff is unconfirmed, but this is being reported by multiple sources. There are some videos that do appear to show this. Um, I mean, there's a whole lot of things about this that don't add up still. We're going to cover some more of those today, but I'm sure over the next week or so, as more information comes out, it's just going to keep getting stranger and stranger and stranger.
Right, and there should be like presumably like video evidence or surveillance within the school. I would assume at least like within the hallways, and not that information should necessarily be released to the public, but certainly we should be able to get some definitive answers from an investigation. If they can be like, oh, the guy was walking up and down the hallway for an hour, so maybe that's why the cops didn't go in. They could see him through the window. Versus like, oh, you know, he walks into a classroom, walks out full of blood, goes into the next one, goes into the next one, kind of thing. Like, you know, we can get some more ideas of the facts of this case if the government were to look a little more into this and explain some of the facts of the case as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the thing, like with modern technology. I mean, look at the cell phone tracking stuff they use to track down the J6 protesters.
Yeah, or COVID people.
Yeah, exactly. So like we have the technology. There's cameras everywhere now. There's really no excuse to figure out what happened, who gave the bad order. Well, we know the local chief of the police is the one that gave the stand down order. But again, like what he said in interviews doesn't make any sense because this guy shot in several different spurts. I mean, I should have printed off a list of these 911 calls that came in because there's several of those where the kids are calling in begging for help, asking for the police, and you can hear gunshots in the background.
It's absolutely sick. It's disgraceful that the police force in this place acted this way, and especially if it turns out to be true that some of the police officers went in, saved their own kid, and then ran out or whatever. I mean, I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they took like the class or a handful of kids or a group or whatever. But the fact that they went out of the building, they didn't stick around, they didn't try to evacuate as many as possible. I really have no idea. And something I mentioned to Mike the other day too is like the police are actually trained in combat, right? They're trained in shooting. They have tests in shooting. They have armor. They have bigger firepower. They're in a group. This is some 18-year-old high school kid who worked at Wendy's, right? And yeah, like you can get shot by anyone, like a baby could shoot you kind of thing, right? But the odds of like one 18-year-old Wendy's employee who's like an absolute maniac killing you versus like an entire squad of policemen who are trained in shooting, who are adults, who have body armor, who have like a lot of ammunition and stuff between all of them. I mean, it just doesn't seem likely that would be a losing fight for the side of the police. They should have, regrouped and gone in together immediately.
Yeah, there's so many unanswered questions still with this, and then there's a few things that we kind of skimmed over that I'm waiting for like clarity on. Like one, for example, like we know that the door was opened. The locked door that he got in from was opened by a teacher from inside the building after the lockdown was declared, supposedly. But the reason I'm starting to doubt that is that doesn't fit the timeline. So the door had to have been opened first and left unlocked. So again, I don't know. But there's definitely details on this still that don't add up or holes in the story.
There are certainly a lot of unanswered questions, especially too with like that alleged Discord server that he was supposedly in, as well as the Buffalo shooter with the former law enforcement agent. And I don't know if he was like a former FBI guy or just a cop or whatever. And then there was also someone in there talking about how to manufacture firearms and stuff. There's a lot of interesting details that like, are we ever going to hear about this, or is it going to be like the Las Vegas shooting where it's just like, oh, so you did this for no reason and let's never look into that again.
Yeah, and I think that's the way it's going to be, is they're just going to kind of hope people forget about it as they push for gun control. The story is just going to start getting covered up because there is just so many holes and there's so many things that don't add up. And it is a failure of law enforcement and a failure of policy. Again, like if the door had been locked to the school and he wasn't able to get in the building and you have a local police arriving on scene, they should have been able to put him down before he ever got in.
Exactly.
Especially he's already firing at civilians that were at a funeral home across the street. The guy's obviously a threat. It's time to just smoke this guy before he kills anybody.
Exactly. And what's this that you have on screen here behind us now, too?
So this is a story I saw, I think, yesterday. This is from Lawrence Jones, who works for Sean Hannity, one of his investigative reporters. So originally there was a Texas or a local police officer, but I guess it's being investigated by Texas DPS now, to Texas Department of Safety, who said that they were in a gunfight with this shooter as they arrived on scene. Well, apparently that was untrue, but there's not even going to be any repercussions for this police officer that lied to the media because he wasn't under oath and it wasn't in an official police report.
Right, yeah. So basically, a police officer just allegedly lied to a journalist, which is not a crime. You can say whatever you want to a journalist. But, obviously kind of threw a wrench in the fact engine here because now everyone was like all confused with what was happening. And it's weird why he would do this as well.
Well, it's probably because he knows they should have gone in and should have, at least if they had gotten into a gunfight with this guy in the hallway there, like, because I think that's what he was alleging originally, that it was the hallway of the school where they got into a gunfight with him. Then he ducked away, and then they took cover and then exited the building. So at least if that had actually happened, there would be some reason for them to be staging out there before they went in, waiting for further instructions. But if that never happened, then there's no reason for them to have waited an hour and 6 minutes at the minimum before making entry.
Yeah, and it's upsetting too because you never know with some of these shooters, even if they do get into a gunfight, you don't know if this guy would have ran away, gone to another building, if he would have hit or something. He could have even got freaked out. I mean, I think of, for example, like the Christchurch shooting in New Zealand, where like the shooter got like rushed by that one Muslim guy and knocked over. And when that happened, a lot of people don't know this. All of his magazines fell like all over the ground, and he's like, "Oh crap!" So then he had to shoot, then run back to the hallway, pick up a new magazine, and keep doing that over and over. And it really like messed his plan up or whatever, right? So you never know. Like even that's just one unarmed guy pushing the dude over, and it made a bunch of problems for the shooter in the end. If the police were shooting at this guy, he could have dropped his magazine, and we can go into the details too, Mike, maybe of how much ammo he had and how he could have been holding all this and all that. So he could have dropped his magazines, whether he was holding them in a backpack or in his pockets or whatever. He could have dropped his firearm. He could have been running and hiding in cover while the kids escaped. So any number of things could have happened positively for the students if the police actually engaged in a gunfight, and it really doesn't seem like that was the case.
No, it sounds like they didn't even try. And actually, we'll get on to the shooter and his gear too in a second, because this is a whole other thing that still doesn't add up. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like you said, just anything to stop him or break the momentum that he had or disrupt his plan would have been a good thing. It also would have, at the very least, bought time to evacuate people if they were actually trying to do that, but it doesn't seem like they were.
Right.
And then this school had windows. This is my other question is, why didn't somebody shoot him from outside the school? If they know he's holed up in a classroom with hostages, you see it all the time in movies and in real life. Like, I mean, there was a bank robbery near where I lived in Florida when I was down there. That's exactly what they ended up doing because
like
after
snipers or something.
Yeah, after a 12-hour standoff with a couple of bank robbers, they thought they were finally serious about shooting hostages. So once they said they were going to do that, they clipped the guy through a window of the bank and then sent a SWAT team in after the accomplice.
Oh wow, yeah. So I mean, and too, like, I don't. We have, again, there's so much disinformation or whatever, or like miscommunication with this, that it's hard to get the facts, because it's even like, why didn't they just like bust open windows and have people crawl out of them, or open the windows and run out? I don't know if that was happening. I mean, it must have been, right? There's so much suspicious or weird stuff with this case that it's just so hard to track and understand.
Yeah, or even just evacuating the other students that were in the other classroom. Yep. If they know the guy's locked in one, whether it's through the windows or through the halls or whatever, like getting everybody else.
If they knew he was in a classroom and it was like a lone shooter, they could have, had the cops outside of the one classroom and then had everyone else evacuating every single other classroom in the meantime. Yeah. If they're going to stand down and not attack the shooter anyways, you may as well quarantine him to one room while you get all the other classrooms out. Yeah, again, there's just so many failures here. I don't know what to look at. Now, the other thing that's circulating around that just doesn't quite add up is, how did this guy end up with all the equipment that he had? So I've read that he had 1,600 rounds of ammunition on him, which isn't cheap. 5.56. If you want to go, about the cheapest you can get it right now is 50 cents per round. Whew. So that's. I wish I could find it that cheap. It's like $1 around everywhere I look. Anyway, sorry, go on. Yeah, so that's at a minimum $1,800, and then the weapons that he had: a Daniel Defense rifle, which was somewhere between about $1,850 and $2,400, depending on which exact model he had. I think it was a DDR7, but there's several different versions of that. It's around like $2,000. Yeah, basically. So let's just call it two. We'll split the difference. And then another Smith & Wesson M&P rifle. So we'll call it $3,000 in weapons. The optics he had on there were EOTechs. So those run for about $600 a piece, $550 to $650. We'll call it $600 each. So that's another $1,200 in optics. So we're at $4,200 plus the ammunition. That's $5,000 in supplies plus whatever equipment he had plus magazines. Right, and body armor too. Was people
Yeah.
suspected he had body armor as well? Correct.
Yeah, now I've read mixed things about that, that he may not have actually had plates on. So he either possibly had soft armor or it was just a carrier for magazines.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I'm not really sure on that.
Well, and that's the other thing too. With speaking of magazines, he had 1,600 rounds of ammunition. You said,
Mhm.
and like most like AR-15 variants or whatever, the easiest type of mag I guess you get, the most standard is like a 30-round mag.
Yeah.
Assuming he was using 30-round mags, how many magazines would that be? 1,600 divided by 30.
Let's see if
That's
there.
a whole lot of magazines, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
how do
that's
you
over
and
40.
yeah, and how do you how much would that weigh? Do you have an idea of that?
60 pounds.
60 pounds plus if he had body armor that would be some more plus the firearms themselves.
Yeah.
And this is like a pretty scrawny kid. Now obviously, we're not saying the shooting didn't happen. We're just saying how peculiar all of this is and how it's so odd. Like, how did he get all the money for this? Was he like working out or something to get fit
Yeah.
to be able to carry all this? Maybe not. Was he slowed down again? If he had to run away from the cops, but he had like half his body weight he had to carry that he's not used to carrying, probably would have been a lot slower than normal. Could the cops have chased him down and got him way easier than they would have thought? There's a lot
Yeah.
of questions to this. And yeah, he would have had about 53 magazines that he was carrying. So presumably he must have had like a backpack of some sort. And this is why, the reason we bring this up is because, again, if the police were in a shootout with him, he may have just thrown off the backpack to be able to run away from the gunfire. And then guess what? He only has like a few magazines on him. This could have really altered the outcome of this shooting.
Exactly. And there's another report I've read that, again, I'd like to get a confirmation of this before I go forward, but I guess his first batch of presumably shooting students and teachers, this string went on for around 10 minutes, and they think he fired 200, over 200 rounds during the first string.
Wow.
So possibly seven magazine changes would be 210 rounds if he had 30-round magazines.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of like very odd stuff, and I don't know why the government isn't coming out and confirming. So, and honestly, one of the reasons maybe the reason the government isn't telling so many facts is because it would make the police look so bad. Because, like I said, when you actually conceptualize having to carry like 53 magazines like in your hands or whatever in your pockets, you can't do it. You need a bag, you need a duffel bag, you need a backpack. And to think like he would have had to, in a very methodological way, I guess you could say, like put the duffel bag down, unzip it, take out a magazine, load it up. That's something that you need to have like almost, I apologize for the insensitive choice of words, but like a slaughterhouse kind of environment for where you have everyone lined up, everyone's trapped, that you can take your time and methodologically like, go through and execute. It's not like the Christchurch shooter where he had like magazines literally taped and stringed to him so he could run around and quickly change mags and stuff. Something is very odd about this, and I think the reason we're not hearing a lot is because if the police intervened, it would have really messed up his kind of system that he had organized or whatever it was necessary for being able to carry out the shooting in the most effective way. And I think that's why the government's not releasing info.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just there's so many failures on their end that there's just no excuse for all these things happening. And I really wonder if there is connections to this guy and a federal agent, like they're saying with the shooter in Buffalo. Again, they're looking through his Discord and his other things too. They know he put a warning out on social media right before he went there. But honestly, if this happened 15 to 30 minutes before the shooting started, I don't expect that to have been caught and got to anybody in time anyway.
Right, and we've seen actually quite a lot with these shooters giving warnings now, which is a very weird like trend, I guess. And I think this kind of started with the Christchurch shooting where the guy was like, hey, tomorrow I'm going to be live on Twitch blowing up a mosque or whatever he said, or shooting up a mosque. And then the Buffalo shooter also announced on his Discord that he was doing this. So, it's a very like weird thing. These people seem to be seeking infamy or something like that. And, the Christchurch shooter and the Buffalo shooter supposedly like, they had like ideological motives for what they were doing. Like certainly the Christchurch shooter, the Buffalo guy, I think was just kind of crazy, but he said he had ideological reasons for what he did. This one though, even is like kind of just like, I am a psycho schizo person who wants to murder kids, so I'm going to do that or whatever. So it's kind of weird that he's posting 4 warnings on social media, and he told that girl that he was going to be doing some crazy stuff too.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I wonder about it too. Is well, I mean, this guy, if he wasn't on their radar, he should have been. This picture surfaced yesterday, I think. New video shows Texas school shooter holding a bag of dead cats.
Wow. Yeah, I saw this on Twitter, and the top comment was, it's always the people that you least expect. And it's like, yeah, right? Like, who would have expected the guy who cuts heads off of cats and puts them in bags and posts them on social media to have done an atrocity. I never would have guessed, like, the kids who play with fire and love arson and commit crimes and hurt small animals would be the ones who hurt humans later on. How on earth could people not have seen the red flags?
Well, and there's conflicting reports again, but apparently this guy had threatened to shoot up a school before a few years ago and was talked to.
I heard that as well. And this wouldn't be the first time, by the way, the FBI or law enforcement hears about a potential mass shooter and then kind of lets them go or lets them off without punishment or doesn't put them in the NICS system. People keep saying, oh, this guy bought a gun legally. This guy bought a gun legally. That's why we need stricter background checks. Look, the reality is if the laws in place were followed, then he wouldn't have been able to get a gun legally because he was already like threatening mass shootings and doing all these obvious danger signs that the FBI would have had reason to put him on the NICS list, right?
Yeah, like I'm against red flag laws, but this is the kind of person that does need to be put on some kind of a list and prevented from buying a gun because they have an actual demonstrable history of making threats and abnormal threatening behavior, whether it's killing a bunch of cats and shoving their heads in a bag.
Right.
Or
Which
others.
is certainly a crime, too. I'm not sure if it's a felony to be put on NICS, but I mean, I think animal abuse, I'm sure that would be something pretty serious.
Yeah, well, and if it isn't, that'd be something I'd be willing to change. Right. I'd be willing to negotiate there. If the person's killing cats or dogs or small animals, torturing things, then yes, add them to a list. And maybe at some point later in their life, they can have their rights restored. But at this point, that's not somebody you want owning a gun.
Well, and it's so unfortunate that in America, we can think of like these, quote unquote, common sense gun laws or whatever, where we can look at someone like this and be like, the guy who's, like I said, committing arson and hurting small animals. Maybe we don't want that guy having a gun. But unfortunately, like you said, Mike, like, we don't support red flag gun laws, not because it would prevent someone like this crazy dude from having a gun, but because it would be used against normal Americans. If you say, oh, like, I don't like abortion, I think it's murder or whatever, right? They'll be like, so if you think it's murder, you probably think those people should die. Well, you shouldn't have a gun then, right? Or if you say anything like, hey, I support the Second Amendment. How do you think this country was founded? Oh, hey, that sounds like an incitement to violence. You're not allowed to have guns. We can't have, nice things, so to speak, because it will always be used against us in the long run. And that's like with these red flag gun laws. It's like, could there be a legitimate use for them? Well, probably, like with this dude. But will there be legitimate uses of it? Probably not. It will probably just be used against us, because I bet you any money, if the FBI wanted to pull strings and get this guy put on a no gun list or whatever, they probably could have done it. Right?
Oh, absolutely. And this is the thing too. Like, we already know the left weaponizes government institutions once they gain control of them. I mean, I was just watching a story a couple days ago about I think he was running for city council in Philadelphia, and I may have the wrong elective office. I know it was a citywide election. All of a sudden, he had an opponent calling CPS on him and his kids to get him hemmed up with that. Yeah, and then just to generate negative news stories. Again, there was nothing wrong. He hadn't done anything, violated any laws or anything like that. And of course, CPS did clear him, but it's weaponizing it. Or I've seen stories too where people are in a hospital and they are unvaccinated, and CPS will call on their kids and say there's some kind of child abuse or their kids are malnourished or whatever. And again, it's completely fictitious. I know a nurse was just prosecuted for this.
I heard that as well. People calling CPS on unvaccinated parents or whatever, saying that they're putting the health of their child in danger or whatever. It's disgusting.
Yeah, and well, unfortunately, the left will repeatedly weaponize government. We saw it with the IRS targeting. We see it over and over again. They will fight back with any of the tools that they have at hand, even when illegal.
Well, speaking of big and terrible things, is your next slide here Whoopi Goldberg? Is that what I see?
I mean, it kind of looks like it.
It looks like her from a distance, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can see how you could get confused. So, yeah, we're going to talk about capitalizing on tragedy. UPenn professor Anthea Butler says the Uvalde police didn't rush into the school because mostly Mexican-American children. I guess she didn't see the lineup at the police department down there or the Border Patrol attack unit, because it was almost entirely, people of Mexican or Spanish descent.
This is like 1 hour from the border, this town where this tragedy took place, and just about everyone there, I think upwards of like 80%, are like from Mexico or maybe just Hispanic, but very large Hispanic, or as this woman would say, Mexican American, families there, and whether it's the police, whether it's border patrol, whether it's the teachers, whether it's the students. Have you seen, like, like Mike said, the pictures of the police there?
Yeah. Well, again, we know the school had 80% of the students were Hispanic to begin with. So was
Right.
the shooter. And, I would
Right.
say 80% is probably a good way to gauge Border Patrol, other things. I'd read a number of years ago that actually the majority of Border Patrol employees were Hispanic anyway. It was one of the few federal agencies that way because, again, you can get a higher premium when you start on there if you're already fluent in Spanish because they can send you right to the southern border.
Yeah, I think it may be a requirement now. I was looking the other day just out of curiosity, and I think it said, like, you must speak Spanish, and it's not even like be bilingual or anything. Like, for example, in the U.S. Army, it's like as long as you're bilingual in like any language, they'll pay you extra.
Yeah.
But for the border, it's like, no, it's Spanish.
Yeah, I mean, it does make sense because, I mean, that's the primary people you're going to encounter.
Yeah, not a lot of like Chinese people or like Russians or like, whoever, French people.
More than you'd think, apparently. I guess there's a whole pipeline there from African nations in the Middle East and
that is true. The
China
southern
now.
border is like the main entry point, I should say. I guess there's not a lot of like Italians, Germans, and like I don't know, Scots, Swedes coming in from the southern border.
Yeah, maybe a few Ukrainians, but that's probably about it.
Yeah, I was saying it like Ukraine. I'm like, no, they're probably coming in. Well, they come in as refugees anyways. Willy nilly to the U.S. And most of them are actually from Africa anyways. They're not even real Ukrainians.
Yeah, the Irish Ukrainian immigrants from a few episodes back. But yeah, it's not just rejects from academia that are trying to use this for their own political advantage. Unfortunately, the Republicans and the Democrats are already ready to capitalize and throw us all under the bus.
It's terrible.
Yeah, Democrats to vote on 6 gun controls that would not have prevented the Uvalde attack. And this is tomorrow that these votes are happening. And of course, Republicans line up to violate your rights in order to please the Democrats.
Yeah, and that's a major, major issue with Republicans and kind of conservatives more broadly is they get called racist all the time, or they get called like baby killers or whatever all the time. They get called these things so much, right? And I think the most common example is like racist. If you call Republicans racist enough or conservatives racist enough, they'll eventually want to prove you wrong because they're like, I'm not racist, I'm not racist. They're like, you're just saying that. Actions speak louder than words. So it forces them to like seek out real racist people or whatever and then condemn them and be like, I'm not a racist. He's a racist. This happened, for example, with who was running for governor or whatever, or the House. It was Roy Moore. That's who was running for House of Representatives in Alabama. And like, the left is always like, oh, right wingers don't care about women. Right wingers don't care about this and that. So you have people like Ben Shapiro who donated the maximum amount to this guy's opponent because of alleged accusations, none of which were proven or corroborated with evidence, just allegations. But because the right wing has been like snapped into place or whatever so much, whipped into place, now on the right, we seek out any example of someone who's, pro gun control or, anti-racist or whatever, and we support that person so much. Or we'll find someone who's actually racist or who actually is a gun fanatic or whatever, and we'll condemn them so that we look more moderate and lovable from by people's perspectives, the Democrats' perspectives, worst of all.
Yeah, it really is like battered wives syndrome.
Yes.
Like every time you call a Republican a mean, dirty name, they cower and hide under their desk, and then they'll just capitulate and go along with whatever the left wants. But again, this is why we need to replace these rhinos with real America First type conservatives. We need mega candidates in there.
Absolutely.
And so far, it's looking like we are going to have a bunch that win. As long as we have a free, fair election in 2022, it looks like they're going to take the House, and there's going to be a lot of them getting into place there that I think are just outstanding candidates. And I think this will change the dynamic in Washington because you start having 10 or 15, Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Lauren Boeberts up there cracking skulls and keeping people in line and then reporting all this just ridiculous things that go on. Things will change.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so unfortunate, too, because there are so many rhinos. But the good part of this is as we continue down our, timeline in America, we'll see the left continue to get increasingly more and more crazy and more like leftist. Yeah. And that will cause like us to become more reactionary in America and cause more people to move more towards like a more nationalistic perspective, as opposed to this kind of, fiscally conservative, socially liberal kind of stance that everyone seems to have been 5 years ago. Now you're seeing a lot more people be like, hey, that stance hasn't really been working out. Maybe I am a little more socially conservative now, and maybe that should be the priority. And you're going to start seeing, because of that, more and more America First Republicans coming up.
Yeah, and social conservatism works. I mean, think
Oh,
about
yeah.
it. Like that's what got all these parents activated on school boards that are now involved, and
Yeah.
they are make up a large percentage of these new mega voters that went out and pushed, whether it's the inside the Beltway Republicans out or Democrat candidates, and they are going to be the major driving force
Yeah.
behind this red wave that's coming. And that's not how it'll be reported in the media, but they are the ones at the core of this. The parents that got frustrated and sick of the schools teaching their kids racism.
Yeah.
That's going to push us forward.
Well, and that's the main talking points right now. It's about like transgenderism and the LGBT and racial issues. Like these are the things, these social issues that are at the forefront of the national conversation. And I'm not saying that we need to be like, just throw away our views on economics and such. But we need to understand that what is at the forefront of the national conversation is not like tax rates. Now, if we lived back in the 50s, trust me, believe me, I would be the first one to be like, oh, we need to be dying on the hill of lower taxes. But today, the hill we need to be dying on is like the safety of our kids. And this is what speaks to people. This is what appeals to people. And that's what we need to be pushing forward on. And as Mike correctly assessed, like that's what gets us victories.
Yes. And yeah, we don't need to abandon like old conservative principles, but the way I look at it is like this, like the average voter is not interested in our economic or tax policy until it hits them right in the wallet.
Right.
The average person, and the kind of person that is a new Republican voter, for lack of a better term, they're not somebody that's looking at those kind of issues. They're somebody that's concerned about all this inflation in food prices. They're concerned about CRT and the LGBT agenda in schools. They're concerned about escalating violence and defunding police and these things that hit them today, tomorrow, next week, and next month. They don't care about the 1 year out policy. You have to bring people in the door first and then educate them to our other positions. So that's, again, it's a real disappointment there aren't more conservative candidates out there taking advantage of this, showing up at the school board meetings, helping guide these parents along, being there with them in their fight now, and also educate them to other positions we have and why these benefit them. Make them understand why we want a different tax policy. Make them understand why we want different gun laws or other things that will benefit liberty.
Well, and speaking of gun laws too, it's funny you mentioned that someone I know in Canada was totally apolitical, was not into politics at all, despite all of the craziness that happens in Canada and stuff. And it wasn't until I spoke to them, like literally just yesterday or maybe this morning, when I'm like, oh, did you hear like Trudeau, story we just brought up here, Trudeau wants to ban all handguns in Canada. And they were like, whoa, wait a minute, what? That's crazy. And then they looked up and they saw that in Vancouver that they want to legalize hard drugs like heroin and crack and meth and stuff, right? And I'm like, what? That's just what I heard from a friend. Don't take that to the bank. But, I'm like, this is what the average apolitical, they weren't into politics. They don't even vote. They weren't into it. Now they're going to be voting in the next election because they're like, whoa, this is too far. Like you're doing things that are taking away people's rights starting today. You're doing things like letting people in my city, in my town do drugs. Like this is a major issue. They're not going to be like you said, Mike, the 1 year out thing where it's like, hey, in 5 years from now, because of interest rates at 3.7%, we're really going to see an impact on your 401c3 or your 401k or whatever. It's like, okay, that may be true, but that doesn't mobilize people, that doesn't activate people and energize them to get out to the polls.
Gas at $5 to $6 a gallon across the country, $7 if you live in California. That energizes people. That gets people out. When you go to the grocery store and you can't find chicken, that gets people out to the polls. Or when your kids are being given drag queen story hour at fourth grade, that gets parents out to the polls. But yeah, it's not just our government that can't wait to capitalize on this. Justin Trudeau is doing the same thing. And this isn't the first time Canada's tried it, actually. They tried passing a similar law a few years ago, and it got shut down. And I did see an article right before we went on, that this bill may have been tabled now, that they weren't able to get support in the Liberal parties in Canada enough to get it past the threshold to get a vote on it.
Wow.
So there is another kind of interesting Canadian gun control story from several years ago. They did enact another ban. I don't remember specifically which one this was because they've enacted several over the last couple decades. But at the end of the day, most Canadian provinces, when local law enforcement said, no, we are not going to enforce this, and eventually they rescinded the law.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's unfortunate too that in Canada, I don't believe, in fact, I'm sure that they don't have a constitutional right to have firearms.
No, they don't.
So it's kind of weird to think that like if the government there just says no one can have any guns at all, then it just happens. Like an act of Congress can disarm an entire nation of people. To me, that blows my mind. Maybe I haven't traveled much, but to me, it sounds crazy that like 50 I don't know how many congress people or parliamentary people or whatever living are in the Canadian system, but like 400 people or whatever could vote and take away the gun rights of tens of millions of people. That
Yeah.
seems absurd to me.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's the system they live under, and that's most other nations on Earth. There's hardly any
Right.
countries on Earth that actually have a
Well,
constitutional
there's
right.
like three or something, isn't there?
Yeah, I think that's about right. I think yeah, I think it is three.
It's like America and Liberia and like Mexico, and you should share that information you told me about Mexico too and their gun rights.
Yeah, like Mexico does technically have a right to keep and bear arms, but there's one gun store in all of Mexico. It's in Mexican City, and it's state run. So they limit what people can purchase by what guns are sold, and they make it a long, arduous process that most people don't want to compete.
Right.
So, and that's kind of similar to Canada now. Like I have a friend that lives up there, and she does farm sitting part time, and she tried to buy a rifle and shotgun up there, like for, well, basically self protection after being at one of these farms when a bear showed up and killed a bunch of sheep and I don't remember a dog and I don't remember what else.
Jeez.
But yeah, anyway, it's like they're limited to like I think it's 5-round capacity if it's semi-automatic. Otherwise, it's basically like bolt-action rifles and shotguns. You
Yeah.
can own some weapons through legacy laws, like certain handguns and things like that. But it's screwed up. It's really limited. Again, they make the process very difficult to discourage people from doing it.
Well, and there's a lot of different paperwork and tests you have to go through to get a firearm in Canada. I think it's called a PAL. It's like a
Yes, yeah.
yeah, it's like a permit basically to get firearm. There's a lot of other testing, and the plan that Trudeau was trying to get introduced to Parliament too. It included things that like people who were deemed a risk to themselves or others, basically red flag laws, that would also be introduced, and that would not allow them to get firearm licenses. So there's a lot of other stuff too that he was sneaking into this bill that isn't just like banning all handguns. If you recall, I think it was just a year or two ago, he banned like something like 1,500 plus different AR style rifles. So now it's basically impossible to get any like long gun in Canada other than, like you said, Mike, a bolt action or shotgun or something like that. But I mean, the tyranny in Canada is absolutely insane when it comes to gun rights.
Yeah, and again, like it's not like this is going to be effective. Like if the criminal wants to get a gun and go commit a robbery with it, they're just going to do it. It's not like, oh, this is a gun-free zone. I guess I better go somewhere else to shoot.
Yeah, exactly. It's the exact opposite. In fact, it's, oh, this is a gun-free zone. Now I know I won't get shot at when I go to attack this place. And I guarantee you, I mentioned this on our last show too. There's like this kind of boomer meme or whatever that is actually very true, where it's like, which school do you think would more likely be attacked? And one school has a sign that says gun-free zones, no one has guns here, and the other sign says like all teachers are armed and will shoot back at suspicious people or whatever. And
Yeah.
it's clear, like obviously, as deranged as these shooters are, they're not totally irrational like monkeys or whatever that can't think or, have any common sense. Like they do understand, oh, if I go to this place, I could be shot and killed. It's more dangerous. This place, I can, get a longer run at my goal before being taken out, or I'm safe for doing this. For example, like the Buffalo shooter, the Christchurch shooter, many of these other ones, they surrendered to police. They didn't want to get shot and died. They say, oh, I'm willing to be killed for this. But at the end of the day, they probably aren't going to pick like a military base, gun show, or police station to shoot up because they're going to get taken out extremely quickly.
Exactly. Now I know there was a mass shooting in Canada a few years ago, and I'm sorry I don't remember how many people were killed, but that it was done with a handgun, but he got it from a police officer. He shot a woman that was a police officer in her car, I think, through the window with a hunting rifle or some type of legal gun, then took her service weapon and her clothes, then used that to then go shoot a bunch of other people somewhere else.
Wow.
So again,
and it's crazy too, because it's like, this is apparently this gun law in Canada they're trying to pass to take away people's handguns. This is in response to the shooting in Texas. But Trudeau already banned like AR-15s in Canada. You would think that like, oh, look what assault rifles can do to people. Let's ban handguns. It's like, what are you talking about, Trudeau? Not that gun laws even work. It's like you said, Mike, people will find ways around gun laws. Look at Mexico. Oh, they have no machine gun laws in Mexico. I guess that means there's no such thing as the cartel there that gets their hands on these weapons.
Yeah, exactly. Like criminals, these laws don't apply to criminals, obviously, and they don't apply to the government. I mean, our own government was running guns down to Mexico in the Fast and Furious thing during the Obama years. We ran
Right.
thousands of we bought guns at gun stores, converted some of them to fully automatic, and then sold them to the cartels. The whole idea was to create a um, uh, reputation that this was happening all the time to then change the gun laws here to make it more restrictive.
Whoa, that's crazy. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and it's ridiculous too because I did a report on gun control a while back when I was in college, and it's something like in Chicago, something like 98% of all guns used in crime were illegally obtained or not purchased by the person using them or whatever, right? So it's like 98% not legally obtained. That's how many guns were used in crime. So, or that's
Yeah.
a percentage of, gun crimes used or whatever, crime guns used.
Yeah, yeah, and that's typical. They're stolen firearms. They're purchased
Right.
with straw. They're these straw purchases. I mean,
Right.
criminals know what they're doing. They don't want anything that's traceable back to them. We'll cover that here in a minute. Um, but
But first, this
yeah,
absolutely ridiculous tweet here from Monica Lewinsky, who I always assumed that, like, if you're in the White House, if you're a congressional intern, or I mean, certainly a presidential intern, you're probably, at least average IQ, probably above average IQ. That's what I thought. But lo and behold, Monica Lewinsky here proving me wrong. It turns out Bill Clinton did not select Monica based on merit and her intellect because clearly she is not as smart as I had thought. She tweets this out. I get a ticket, $450, because I get a $450 ticket because of an effing speeding camera that caught me. And speeding could endanger others. But assault rifles are legal. WTF, America. WTF. Terrible grammar and everything, of course. And Mike, what are your thoughts on this before I go off?
again, like the whole argument doesn't make any sense anyway, and I think she's just mad she got a ticket. But it's
That's
I
an
do.
expensive ticket. How
Yeah, I was
far
about to
is
say
it going?
I can agree with the sentiment because $450 for a speeding ticket's insane. I mean, I got a ticket from a robot a few years ago and it was $85, and I felt pretty bad about that.
Well, and look how many likes and retweets too. Thousands of people agreeing with this, tens of thousands, and it's ridiculous because, I've talked about this many times before. Like, a gun is a tool, murder is an action. Okay, and if we apply that to like Monica's example here, a car is a tool, speeding is an action. So you were punished for your action of speeding.
Yeah.
The action was, you used a car to perform that action. In the same way, you can use a gun, a tool, to commit murder. You could use a knife, a different tool, to commit murder. You could use a car, another tool, to commit murder. So it's not even like a fair equivalency here. It would be the equivalent of me saying, oh, people speed, so we should ban cars. That would reduce speeding.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the memes floating around that like after 9/11, why didn't we ban airplanes?
Exactly.
Um,
Right. It's the same.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. There is no logical connection. It's basically her trying to be culturally relevant. I think she just put this tweet out, knowing people would send it out. It would get her some publicity, and maybe somebody will give her a talk show that can bomb again.
Right. Exactly. Oh, was she on a talk show previously?
Yeah, she had her own like late night show, or I think it was a late night show for I don't know if they even ran a season, but yeah, it was off air in no time.
Wow. What did they call it? Like Cigar Hour with Monica or something like that. Terrible joke.
If they didn't, they should have.
Well, okay. Well, this is I really don't have much to say about this because it's just so absurd. But like I said, I mean, this goes back all the time to this argument of like, oh, if we just ban guns, things will go away. All the murders will not happen anymore. No, guns are simply a tool. They're a means to an end. If your end is protecting yourself, the gun is the most effective way to protect yourself. If your means is murdering someone, there's a whole lot of ways that you can do that through explosives, through, running people over. You can't defend yourself with a vehicle. It's kind of hard. You can't defend yourself with like, a fertilizer bomb or whatever. You can't defend yourself with these tools. But a gun is something you can give to your grandma and know that she's safe if she's living alone, or your mother or your sister, right? Yeah, a gun is something you can carry outside in a dangerous area of town and know you're protected. But yet, this is like the one thing that the government wants to disarm you from. It's your firearms, because they know it's the most effective way to defend yourself. There are more effective ways to commit mass havoc in a country, believe me.
Yeah.
But they don't want to ban those methods. They want to ban you from having a gun, and that's for a very specific reaon.
Yeah, because it is really the great equalizer. They say God made man and Samuel Colt made all men equal. Because it doesn't matter if you're a 75-pound woman or 300-pound guy, a 9mm still makes you just as dead. And
exactly.
That's really all there is to it. It is the perfect equalization of force. Anybody can defend themselves with it. It's simple to use, and when you need police, they're a minimum of 4 minutes away, and that's if you're lucky. In a lot of
Yeah.
cities now, their response time is 7 to 12 minutes. Say, how long did it take the
If
cops
they
to
show up at all.
Yeah, that's true too. If they don't tell you this is what did they tell the guy in New York during the riots when he called the police because there were people breaking into his building that it was
There's a lot of calls that I heard. I heard automated robots saying like police are unavailable at this time or whatever, and I'm like, bro, that was in like Chicago or something. But yeah, Compton, Chicago, Detroit, New York City, these big cities, with a lot of crime. The police sometimes don't want to respond at all because of the neighborhoods. And in some neighborhood, not to get too off track, but in some places like Compton or whatever, in the projects in California, they put out like KOSs on cops, kill on sight. So the cops literally just said, look, if you guys are going to shoot us as soon as we come into your neighborhood, and then the residents say, good, you cops are racist and we don't want you here anyways. I'm glad you're dead. I was literally arguing with my one friend in college who was black, and I'm like, but what if a cop dies trying to like protect your community? And she was like, I don't care. That's what they signed up for. And if you say that to a cop, they're going to be like, I'm not responding to the call. Anyways, not to get too off track, but yeah, if the cops show up at all.
Yeah, or in this shooting in Texas, it took them somewhere between 12 and 14 minutes to get there.
Right.
So again, guns are the great equalizer. Here's a story though you're not going to see covered by the mainstream media, and this happened, I think, the day after this shooting in Texas. So a woman with a concealed carry permit took down an attempted mass shooter after he was speeding through a neighborhood. They had some kind of an event going on, party or graduation party or something. Police gave him a ticket. He went home, got a gun, came back, and started shooting at people there. And then this woman put 6 in him and put him down before he was able to actually kill anybody else. I think there were some people injured and wounded, but either way, she fired, took him down, and he sustained multiple gunshot wounds and then died later at the hospital.
Well, and it's crazy that like Democrats and leftists want to disarm people, like good law-abiding people. And honestly, I would understand the argument if they were just like, oh, you have to you have to have a permit to carry a firearm or whatever. Like that's one thing. But they want to completely disarm people. They don't want you to have the right to bear arms. They definitely don't want you to have the right to like keep arms either. And it's upsetting because, again, people say the shooting never would have happened if there weren't any guns, but they would have, right? Like I said, 98% of gun crimes are committed with illegal firearms. So this person totally would have had a gun, legally or illegally, to commit this shooting. The only question is, would someone there who's the good guy, or any of the people there who could have stopped this person, would they be armed so that they could adequately defend themselves or others?
Yeah, exactly. And again, this argument doesn't make any sense to disarm the populace, and it doesn't have to be a gun that somebody does a mass killing with. We've seen plenty of them in China with knives. There was a recent one, Norway or Sweden, I can't remember where it was, where a guy killed 5 people with a bow and arrow. Wow. Yeah. Well,
in China, I think something like 27 people died in a university stabbing, which is more people than died in just about all of the mass shootings we hear about in America, right? I mean, 27 people. It may have been like 36 or something too. I'm going on the low end because I read this like a number of years ago. I think this was back in 2015, 16. But there was this mass university stabbing in China, and dozens of people died because of a knife.
Yeah, and we've had tons of these too in London, especially. There was one just within the last 2 weeks, the guy with a machete on a train that I don't think anyone actually died, but I know he hacked a bunch of people.
It was 31 civilians killed in this attack. It was in 2014 in China, and 31 civilians died, and there was 140 injured.
Unbelievable.
It was a group of
140 injured.
Yeah, there was 8 knife-wielding terrorists that attacked a bunch of people at a train station. So 31 civilians died, over 140 injured.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. And again, you don't have to have a gun. You don't have to have a knife. I mean, more people are murdered in the U.S. with blunt objects every year than any other thing. I don't know if we're going to ban baseball bats next, but I guess I shouldn't say that out loud, or somebody will propose legislation for it.
Well, you never know, and I think we're just about out of time here, but I will say one thing that's kind of absurd of like, suggesting something and then it actually happening. Something I really don't like is when conservatives use the arguments or like the argument of like, oh, leftists aren't consistent. If they were, they would also ban this. It's kind of like when we talk about guns and it's like people are like, oh, leftists, most shootings are actually committed with handguns. It's like, don't say that. They'll just ban handguns like Trudeau's doing. And something that actually happened in real life is people kept saying over and over and over again, oh, you're pro-abortion. I guess you don't care if someone assaults a pregnant woman and gets charged with 2, batteries or 2 assaults or 2 murders. So then you have places like New York who literally said, oh yeah, good point. Okay, now if you assault a pregnant woman, you like hit her in the stomach with a baseball bat, it's just normal assault. Even if the baby dies, just normal assault. Because you're right. You guys are totally right. To be consistent, that's not a baby. Why do we do things like this? Don't tell the left they're inconsistent. That doesn't change people's minds.
Exactly. They'll just take advantage of that and then change the law.
It would be like saying to us, you guys say you're pro-gun, but you're not in favor of legalizing machine guns, right? I mean, think about it. Guns are guns. Your right to protect yourself is your right to protect yourself. Why put a limit on like how many shots can fire at a particular time? We'd be like, yeah, good point. We should legalize machine guns. Let's do that.
I'm for it. I'm for abolishing the ATF.
Yeah, I was saying to Mike, I don't like the ATF, but I don't mind the A or the T. So maybe we'll just get rid of the F, and that'll be good enough.
Yeah. They can keep regulating alcohol and tobacco and I guess explosives and yeah.
But that's it. Anyways, thank you all for joining us here today on Punching Left. We'll be back here as always on Tuesday, Thursday, and Sundays at 7:30 Eastern Time. You can find us on all of our platforms at punchingleft.com. Go there right now, type it into your search bar, punchingleft.com, and then subscribe to our Telegram channel and to our Odyssey account. That's where we'll post all of our videos. Thank you all very much for joining us here tonight, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. God bless and take care.
Yeah, and keep an eye out. We're going to probably be changing a few things with our format. We'll still be doing shows on Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. We may do some added videos in between and have some other things coming up, so keep an eye out. Again, subscribe at punchingleft.com. Thanks again, and we'll see everybody soon.